This is kind of like a duality that pops up, and this is the idea of like the specialist and the generalist.
Mhm.
And you know, it seems like for the most part, specialists are more valued.
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like it's easier to get paid being a specialist. And there's a huge value in it, right? Because if you need surgery, you don't want to just go to any surgeon or any doctor. If you need brain surgery, you want to go to a neurosurgeon, and they work within a very specific domain in a very specific context, kind of just drilling down on the same problems, get really good at this problem. But then you have generalists who kind of just see the interrelationship, and they span across a lot of fields. It
Mhm.
tends to be a lot harder for generalists to kind of, get paid or kind of like get respected for their work and get valued for their work. How do you see, this relationship? Is it that some people just have to be specialists, and we need people to specialize? We need specialists, and we also need generalists. Not everybody can be a specialist. Not everybody can be a generalist. How do you think about this kind of dichotomy of generalists and specialists?
Totally. I mean, this is it's interesting because the field of psychology is intrinsically connected to socio-political issues. And the main reason we have hyper specialization in education and therefore hyper specialization in identity formation in professional classes, which is the deeper thing, which is that the experts find it hard to even talk to each other across different fields, even across subfields of the same practice like medicine. Like different kinds of surgeons actually don't know what other types of surgeons do. Different doctors who are specialists don't. They have to like, and so that hyper specialization is a artifact of the way modern bureaucracies have been structured and built. And then the educational system leads into that. And there's many, many obvious and good reasons why we would do this. And it's linked to the basic sociological dynamics that even like Max Weber saw long ago of modernity being about increasingly complex divisions of labor. And so that's like an amazing thing in many ways, that we have a robust enough socialization system that we can actually produce this many different kinds of experts who wouldn't be able to do that work if they didn't spend the time to have that expertise. So that's so the question of why generalists are not rewarded or even educated to be generalists is answered right there in what I said. The closest thing we have that's like sanctioned by society as a generalist would be somebody like a CEO. That's the kind of that character. Oh, they're kind of allowed to know stuff about everything. And yet they're not. They're really just allowed to know everything about this business. So they supervene over many of the specialists within the business, but they're still just a specialist in running businesses. But that's sense like a person who's allowed to have the broader capacities, who doesn't have to specialize, who actually is valuable because they know what all the specialists do, but they're not one of the specialists. So it's not either or. At this point in social evolution, we're going to continue to need more specialists, but we don't need to have the truncation of personality development that accompanies hyperspecialization and the communicative incapacities across different expertise areas that characterizes the kind of siloed, unidisciplinary or multidisciplinary, conflict-ridden space of current bureaucracies of meeting making and care delivery. So in an ideal world, you would train a specialist in ways so that they would be able to think like a generalist, even though they are still a specialist. And you would train generalists, full stop, you would train generalists to have capacities in certain specialties, but to operate mostly as generalists. And this is, I think, the main skepticism of the generalist, which is that they actually don't know anything. Right? And so I usually encourage people and I get I'm a generalist, for example. But as I described earlier, I did intensive training in one area, in cognitive developmental psychology and a specific set of psychometrics. And I spent 10 years working in that field as one of the few people in the world who could do a certain kind of hierarchical complexity coding. And so you have to have deep specialization if you want to have credibility as a generalist, I believe, at least somewhere. And then back to the point I made earlier, if you build out a whole bunch of generalist capacities, it should be easier for you to become an expert in a particular area and possibly several areas. But as a generalist, you need to know where you are not able to stay abreast of everything that's developing in some of these expertise. So there is a point where you have to figure out a good division of labor with other people in your collective intelligence network so that you have an overall balance between the communication exchanges between the experts and the generalists. And then within our own minds, balancing the expert and generalist. There are emotional and personality proclivities, I think, that are probably pretty inbuilt or at least deep in early socialization environments that would make someone more likely to be a generalist or a specialist. And there are inevitable differences in attainment and cognitive complexity. Some of them vary, probably as genetic, frankly, which make it so that some people will simply not be able to be generalists or specialists in particular areas. So for example, surgeons have to have a certain kind of sensory motor capacity at the level of control of the minutia of muscles in their hands, which some people just don't have. And in places like surgery and the military and other places, it's like not everyone can be a fighter pilot, and they just know that. So there are limitations on who can end up in which spot. The other reason there's animosity towards a generalist is because the generalist is the only one who can step in and kind of look at the whole system and be like, no. Whereas the expert can be like, this isn't really working down here in my part of this. Like, let's fix this particular aspect of the thing. But the generalist can look at the whole thing and be like, we actually can't fix that particular aspect because it's related to this aspect, which is related to that aspect. So actually, no. We need something fundamentally different. And so that has always made the generalist socially and politically inconvenient, basically, whereas the expert is not. The expert is usually perpetuating. Sometimes the expert will be able to raise an alarm from their specific area that portends bigger systemic issues. And precisely their expertise allows them to ring that alarm. But it's the generalist who is the one who's articulating the system-wide diagnostic critique and proposals for rebuilding. And so that's why there's also a kind of immune system in the body of society to kind of keep certain kinds of generalists disempowered, let's say, and to promote other generalists. By the way, there's always generalists. It's just a question of the integrity and how general. So that's a little bit of that, but it is important for those people who aspire to be generalists, I think, to really gain some expertise in a specific area, because that just puts everything else in context, and it gives you credibility with people who had no interest in being generalists and think generalists are so far removed from reality they can't get anything done, right? Which is the critique of the generalist by the people in the, quote, trenches, right? So you have to spend your time in the trenches. Anyway, so that's a little bit me riffing on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're a specialist, learn how to think like a generalist. And if you're a generalist, learn how to specialize in something, how to piece things together.
Yeah, exactly.